It's 2023, and Darryl Gardiner pulls up in front of the supermarket in his old hometown. It's a place where he experienced and witnessed unimaginable violence. But he's different now. A dad of 4 with a loving wife, a meaningful and impactful career. He got out. But as he heads to the refrigerators to grab some drinks, he notices an old man at the counter. He looks vaguely familiar. The man glances up, seems to recognise Darryl, and quickly shuffles out of the shop. It's then that he realises who it is: his mother's abuser, the one who made their life a living hell, the one who sent him on a path to violence himself. Darryl places his drinks on the counter. He walks towards the door where the man has just exited. He can feel the anger, the violence, the old him. It's all there, bubbling to the surface. I'm Gemma Barth, and you're listening to True Crime Conversations, a podcast exploring the world's most notorious crimes by speaking to the people who know the most about them. As Darryl looked out the door of the supermarket, he spotted his family in the car, his loving family, a home that didn't know violence. He would never go back to that life. He let the man go, and he calmly paid for his drinks. Darryl not only came from a violent childhood, he became an abuser himself. He pushed, grabbed, hit, choked. He was a violent and dangerous man. But the courts gave him a second chance, and he is one of the ones who actually used it. Now, Darryl is a mental health clinician with 20 years' experience. He runs Rolling with the Punches, a program that provides counselling, group therapy, rehabilitation, education and support to men, women and families. He started a free boxing program called Gloves Up for Change for women and girls, raising awareness around domestic violence and providing a safe space to heal, connect and build confidence. Darryl's story is obviously one of hope. He turned his life around, but it does present an interesting moral and social dilemma. We keep seeing our courts giving men a second chance that leaves women dead. It's a tale as old as time. It's a tale we tell all too often here on this podcast. So what does Darryl think? How do we really address men's violence against women? He joins us now. Darryl, welcome to True Crime Conversations. Today, you're a mental health advocate. You've helped thousands of men and women kind of move away from violent situations. But if I was to meet you when you were in your mid-20s, if I was sitting across from that man, who were you?
It probably wouldn't have been a time where we would have been in the same room, Gemma. Thank you for having me on today and being interested in my story and what it can bring to the podcast and to other people out there. Yeah, I can't imagine there would have been a time where I would have been sitting in an interview doing a podcast in my mid-20s. Probably the only interviews I was doing at that time were around some of the, troubles I was in or facing or things like that. But I would probably think I would be completely different to now, or I know I would have been completely different. I was still angry and, really immature and definitely not open to being accountable for conversations like the one that we're probably going to have today.
Mm. Let's go back to the start. You were born in 1983 into quite a violent situation from the start.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about your early childhood, what that looked like?
Yeah, not a problem. So, I was born in 1983. My mum was, I always say 15 when she had me, but I do the maths properly. I think she was 16, not that it matters too much, but mum came from a really dysfunctional family. Her dad passed away when she was little, so she grew up with her mum and 2 younger sisters. So she was not only in the position of caring for her mum, but also for her younger sisters as well. Her mum was quite unwell. So when she came home and said that she was pregnant, that news wasn't received well. In fact, her mum tried to make my mum miscarry. So that was probably my earliest exposure to violence in utero. After that, mum and I moved out, and probably around the age of 1 or 2, I guess I always like to, when I'm trying to relay this story to people that maybe they don't understand, talk about learning violence as a first language. And that's probably where it escalated even further. My mum met her partner at the time when I was 1 or 2 And if you had had the benefit of Google or social media, things like that back then, would have been able to research him and find out that he was pretty violent or quite violent himself. So he came on the scene really quickly, moved in with mum and I really quickly. Now, my mum had a really tough life herself. So the first time she was shown any love, based on her, attachment needs, just sort of blossomed to that and opened up to having, although this man was showing love or, masquerading as love, which was really violent, controlling behavior, he moved in with us really quickly and abuse, I guess, skyrocketed from verbal abuse to physical abuse and then to what was, really degrading. And probably the hardest thing for mum was sexual abuse, really violent rapes, really regular. You know, when that was interspersed with the verbal and physical abuse, it was like living in a war zone almost. It's like looking for landmines all the time. So probably by the age of about 3 or 4, I guess I became an expert at body language and reading people, and I could tell by the way that he would put a cup down or shut a door or pick something up, whether there was an explosion about to come. It's like a thunderstorm coming in on the horizon, and often people would say to my mum, your son's so well mannered and he's so polite, and you've obviously raised him really well when I was little, and I was really terrified to make a noise because making noise meant you were seen and meant you in the firing line as well. So during that time, I was getting hurt a lot, and I was hurt through what I saw as well, but I was being physically hurt a lot as a toddler as well, and seeing some really brutal stuff that really shaped that idea for me that not only violence is a first language, but violence was everywhere. And I guess I thought that's what men did as well because that's all I'd seen.
He was in your life till you were around 5, if I'm right. I mean, a 4-5-year-old has memories, but what is your first memories of the violence? Because you were 1, 2, 3 when this was happening.
Yeah, so my first memories of the violence, and I guess they come as I've gone through therapy myself over the years. I've opened up more of those probably repressed memories, Gemma, and it was my earliest memories were of violent suggestions in the sense of there was always things laying around like guns and knives and things like that, and they've always been sort of waved around and brandished and in a real threatening, like a menacing manner. One of my earliest memories of violence was mum was looking after 2 kids. One was the same age as me, we're probably both 3, and the other little boy's little sister was only about 6 weeks old, and mum was looking after both of these kids as well. And during that time, I think my mum had gone to the church to try and get some help. She was desperate for some help, so she joined a church, and one of the ladies from the church came around to the house to try and help her. And I could see him watching mum through the window and getting more and more angry, because she was, dared to talk to someone about the abuse, what was happening in the home. And when she came back down to the house, and I've spoken to mum about this since, and mum actually thought that because she was nursing this little 6-week-old baby, that he wouldn't hit her because she was holding a baby. And but like every benchmark of violence that he impacted on our family or inflicted on our family, mum and I, you'd always think, well, that's the worst it'll get, but it would always get worse. And on this day, mum came back inside the little flat we lived in, and he started, carrying on and abusing mum verbally. And then he hit her, and so that time he fractured her orbital bone or jaw. It was really severe. And mum talks about that now, and she said probably harder for her than the getting hurt, getting hit with such severity and force was the fact that the little baby and the baby's brother were really crying. They were really hysterical because they hadn't seen that before. But she said probably one of the hardest things for her was the fact that as a 3-year-old, she said, I didn't even blink or flinch because it was just normal. Like, it was just normal, and so that was one of the earliest memories. I guess one of the other ones where I was a victim was at the swimming pool one day, and I think we ran tried to get away or something like that, and what would happen was this like sort of pursuit pattern where we'd go away, he would find us, he'd come back and say, oh, I won't hurt you again, I'll love you, and that would very quickly graduate to, well, the reason they hurt you last time was because you did this and you did that. But in that really fleeting moment of like, I'm going to do everything I can to get you back and so I can control you guys again. He'd be nice in the sense of maybe shout dinner or like hot chips or something. And on this occasion, he took us to a swimming pool, and I remember I couldn't swim. I was only little, but I didn't go to have those safe experiences that my own kids have, where they can go to swimming lessons, they play footy as kids, things like that. I didn't get to have those experiences, so I couldn't swim. And I remember him telling me to get in the pool, and I was really scared. But in his eyes, I remember this really vividly. In his, I could almost see this like, you're being ungrateful. Like, I've brought you down to the pool and I've paid for it, and I'm a really good stepdad, and you're just being like a shit of a kid and ungrateful, and now I'm going to punish you, because his family were there too. So almost like he was embarrassed that someone would define him by not getting in the pool. And so I remember him kicking me in the pool, like kicking me in the back, and I fell in the pool and I was starting to drown. I was getting really scared, and he pulling me out by the hair and giving me a bashing in front of his family and other people that are at the swimming pool. And I just remember that message was really clear. Like, if I can do this to you here while everyone's watching. And poor mum was on the towel. She was terrified. Imagine what I'll do to you when behind closed doors. And I think that was sent a message to me to behave, be good, not be a good kid. But also sent a message to my mum, like, I can hurt you, but I also hurt him. I don't care,
Even the fact that you have such a vivid memory as a 3-year-old. I mean, I think back to when I was 3, and I honestly can't remember much. It's like all a bit of a blur.
Yeah.
But you have these really strong, vivid memories of things because they were so traumatic.
Yeah. Yeah. Those are things that I pushed down for a long time, and I've started to come out in the last couple of years. The way I'm glad they come out now, because you're able to work through that and get to peace with those parts of your life that had always been a bit confusing.
Your mum eventually left him, and there was an incident where he found your house and entered your house illegally. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, so mum had left, and we're talking about now probably about 1987, rural New South Wales, a place called Albury, which is a pretty big regional centre, but probably not a huge amount of support for single mums back then. There's probably not a huge amount of support now, to be honest, but things are different, 40 odd years ago as well. But mum had managed to, my mum was really courageous in the sense that she'd always try and get us away. She'd never give up, which was, as an example of the character that she had, despite all the hardships that she had faced herself in her short life. I liken it to 2 kids trying to run away, because my mum was just a little kid as well, But we'd gotten away, and mum was in the tub taking a bath, and I think I was asleep, and he came in through the window, and the sexual stuff, and I've learnt more about this over the years, reading books that my mum has written. My mum became an academic in the social work field, and a really strong advocate for survivors of intimate partner sexual violence, and has written many books, and I've read those books, and it's good because I understand violent men more, and understand different sort of counselling dynamics and social work theories and things like that through reading them. But unfortunately, reading those books probably unlocked a lot of things, or reminded me of a lot of things I hadn't never spoken to my mum about, or probably had never really dealt with or spoken to anyone about, had just repressed and locked away. And this was one of those things. So he'd come through the door. You think about sexual assault and rape, and think any level of that is horrific, and that's absolutely right. But what had happened was there was like this graded exposure to sexual violence. Like it had just continually gotten worse and worse, to the point where, he would, piss on my mum and do all these horrific things to her just to degrade her, more and more and more. And, threatened to try and make her have sex with his friends, and, rape her with gunpoint and all this awful stuff. And, on this night, he'd come through window and was raping my mum while she took a bath at knife point. And, I think to myself now that back then people had to know what was happening because we were in social housing or housing commission. Now the walls are, made out
Very
of
close.
paper, and
Yeah.
basically, and people would have heard what was happening, but nobody got involved. No one helped us or tried to save us or intervened or anything like that. I don't know if they mind their own business and thought that's not any of my business, or maybe they're just, I don't know, coward. I don't know, but I don't know what happened on this night, but something happened in that he got disturbed. I remember trying to disturb, get in between them or try and wedge myself in between my mum and him when that was happening because I didn't care, Gemma. When I was getting bashed when I was a little kid, a little toddler, honestly, I didn't care. I just, all I wanted was give my mum a break for a couple of minutes. I just wanted her to have a break. She had so many bashings, so much sexual abuse, things like that. Even when she was a kid, she was a victim of child sexual assault. And I didn't know that as a toddler, but I knew what was happening in that moment. And when these things would happen, I just would do anything to give her a reprieve. And, mum would say, I didn't, I hated the fact that as a 3 or 4 year old, you knew how to talk almost like a man. And I think now when I look back at it, it was my way of, if he was getting angry at mum, I would start to say things to him like, I'm going to kill you when I grow up and I fucking bash you and you're a dog and things like that. And the things that I'd heard because I knew it would make him angry.
Yeah.
So I would talk to him like that as a toddler. So then he would direct those bashings to me. And I think I didn't mind because it gives my mum a break for 3, 4, 5 minutes. Maybe a day even would be the best outcome. And on that night saying, I wanted this. I didn't want this to happen to my mum anymore. So I remember trying to wedge in between them and getting on a lot of those occasions and getting hurt myself. But at least it broke up that abuse that was happening to my mum. Might give her a chance to run away. Even if she left me, I didn't care. Just get away. I wanted her to get away because I hated her crying. I hated to see her hurt all the time. And anyway, on this night, must have been disturbed more significantly than a little kid disturbing him, and took off. And but on that night or around that night, he ended up murdering someone else.
On that night.
Yeah, as far as I can recall, it was the same night, and I pieced together articles from the newspaper and things like that. But he and when I look at the chronology, like the time. When I share my story, I often share an article from when he was sentenced in the Supreme Court, and that article was from 1988, and so I was 5 then. So he'd killed someone in a drunken or drug-fueled rage, they said in the newspaper. This is the level of violence that he was capable of. They dismembered this guy, chopped his head off, and chucked his body down a mine shaft, and then one of the co-accused went back later on, ended up going to jail for that for 9 years for manslaughter. And I think that was the level of violence he was capable of. And in the article, in the paper, when the judge is sentencing him, such a weird statement to read when you live through what we lived through, and then you have the judge saying that the murder was not premeditated and that the accused had shown a great deal of remorse during the court proceedings. And I think if you had to come to live in our house for 30 seconds, he wasn't capable of remorse. So judge got that wrong. Yeah.
It's amazing that you and your mum survived him.
Yeah. And even to go even further, when he got out of jail years later, my mum saw him down at the river having a swim, and the judge says he's capable of remorse, and from shoulder blade to shoulder blade, he's got tattoos that says headhunter. That's not remorseful. He's just
Yeah.
yeah.
Your mum then met a nice man.
Yeah.
Ken.
Yeah.
Tell me about that period of your life, because he, in your words, was kind and fair and loving. Were you able to enjoy that?
Yeah. So my stepfather, Ken, I still call him my dad. He's this year, unfortunately, passed away
Oh, sorry.
10, thank you, 10 years this year. And yeah, he if you talk about the role models in terms of the men that I'd seen growing up, so my dad, my biological dad, he wasn't really around. He was violent. He wasn't violent towards mum. Um, and it's funny because I talk to my dad now about sharing my story and things like that. And he still lives in the small country town where I'm from. And he's pretty quiet character, my dad. And he'll say, you know, glad you're sharing your story. But he said, when you, sometimes I think people think you're talking about me when I'm talking about the other guy. So anyway, my dad wasn't really around. And then we had the other guy for a few years. And then mum met Ken, and he was a remarkable person, Gemma. He was a really beautiful man. You know, it showed my mum that love was possible, that it wasn't tied to control, that relationships could be healthy and happy and safe. And also that, you know, he was 10 years older than mum. So I think he met mum when mum was 21 and he was 31, I think. And they came from different lifestyles. So they clashed on some things, but I always remember him showing mum as we were growing up that like conflict could be safe, and you know you could resolve things without having to resort to violence or running away or things like that, and he wasn't going to hurt her. And you know he was a yeah, really hard worker, um, you know, loving, caring, fair, really quite firm, but not scary. He was just a safe man. And, you know, we were also lucky to have him, mum especially.
You yourself became a violent man. So do you think that Ken's influence wasn't enough?
I think that and that's a really good question, Jim. No one's ever asked me that before. I think his influence was absolutely enough, but if we look at it like 100% of an influence trying to come into to a young man, I was probably only open to receiving 30% of that, because 70% of my brain or body or whatever was still locked in, like, well, this is what's happened in the last 4 or 5 years. Is that what men are? How come nobody's talking to me about it? So mum, when she met dad, she went off and did a lot of, you know, went through a lot of therapy and received a lot of support and things like that to work through the really horrific experiences she'd been through. And you know, I'm really grateful that she had the opportunity to do that. She had this really beautiful life, her and dad together, despite still carrying a lot of trauma. But I guess I say, got forgotten about almost, or maybe mum thought I didn't remember those things, but I did, and still had a lot of that like swirling around in my head.
I know that boxing became an outlet for you really young as well. 10?
Yeah, probably about 10, yeah, 10 or 11, yep, yeah.
How did that help you?
Yeah, probably by the age of about 10, I was getting a little bit confused, or probably a bit more confused about things, Gemma, what had happened when I was a kid, and um, probably wanting to understand a bit more about my own dad and where he was, and things like that. And um, I haven't ever really spoken to my mum about this before, but I remember the age of around 10-ish, I was prowling, snooping around in my mum and dad's room. I don't know, maybe looking for Christmas presents or something, and I come across some paperwork that showed that while so probably should have prefaced a little bit of the story. I don't share this part much because it's not really my story to tell. But during that last sexual assault, where he came in through the window and raped mum, my mum became pregnant. So and she had a daughter. And when I was, you know, creeping around in their room that day looking for presents or whatever, I found some paperwork that had showed that my stepdad had like legally adopted my sister while her biological father was still in prison. And I guess I probably started to think a lot at that stage. Why would you not want like me to be the same or have the same name and
Be adopted.
and things like that.
Yeah.
And because I didn't really see my dad a whole lot during my childhood either. And I started to even think at that time, maybe maybe you don't want to do that with me because must probably be because I let mum get hurt and I couldn't save her. And now
So
you've had to
heavy.
try and now you're like my dad was helping her out, helping her out, but like supporting her to get help and riding those waves, that roller coaster of emotions with her, and rock solid as well. But I thought maybe you blame me a little bit for that. And of course he didn't, but I started to think all these things. Maybe maybe my mum doesn't. Maybe my mum doesn't like me either because I let her get hurt when I was a kid, and maybe she probably even thinks if I didn't have you, I could have gotten away easier, but I had to cart you around all the time, and my mum wasn't doing anything to demonstrate those feelings, but as a 10-year-old, I started to jump to all those conclusions, and I thought, I don't really know what to do. I felt like I was pretty unloved and unwanted in that moment. So I just remember leaving home and getting on my bike and riding. I didn't really know I was going to go, but things were pretty heavy at that stage for me. Outwardly, I was pretty happy. Like I preferred to sort of hang out on my own, but inside I was carrying heaps that I just never spoke to anyone about, and ended up, as fate would have it, rode to the PCYC in Albury and wandered in there and was just drawn straight. They had basketball and all different things happening in there at that same afternoon, but was just drawn into the boxing room and sort of watched before I had the confidence to do anything or ask anyone any questions. Just watching men spar and box and thinking this is violence, but it was safe, it was
Yeah.
controlled, and I just fell in love with the sport straight away and started spending a heap of time there, even starting to wag school, things like that, and just go there and hang out. And my mum had another couple of kids by that stage. Dad was in the truck a lot, and so for me, it was a place to go and a bit of connection as well. Yeah,
It
felt I belong
sounds
somewhere.
it sounds like during your childhood there were these moments that could have righted your path. Like things like Ken, things like boxing, but you ended up going down the violent route.
Yeah.
How did that happen? How do you think that kind of spiraled?
Yes, spiraled pretty quickly after that, Gemma. I don't know what, I don't know what was the catalyst for it, but I don't know if I started hanging around the boxing gym and thinking I was probably a little bit better than I was, a bit tougher, or had to form this identity of being a young man. I know at one stage there was, some other sexual abuse happening in our like extended family, and I thought it was my responsibility to fix that. So I did that in as a young teenager in the way that I thought was right. Um, Started to become angry about different things, and I guess I felt like I'd asked to go and live with my dad a fair bit, but hadn't been allowed to go. Um, but then I started to, and I was really ashamed of it now, but started to do the things that I thought when I was growing, I'm never going to do that. I'd promised myself I'm never going to do that. I started, pushing my mum around a bit, becoming verbally abusive to her, to try and get not to excuse it, but to try and get my own way to go and live with my dad. I thought if I could just sabotage this home life by being an awful young man, then that would make the decision for me. And they'd say, well, you can just go then because you'd been, an asshole around the home. Started being really disrespectful and rude to Ken, tried to fight him a few times, and I just hit this part of my life at about 13 or 14 where I was just didn't really know what a man was, but I was just determined to find this own way of being what I guess I thought a man was, and it was so wrong. I damaged a lot of relationships and started to use violence a lot, even at school and things like that. Got to the point where my mum and dad agreed for me to go and live with my dad, and I've got a good relationship with my dad now. But during that time, it was pretty crazy. My dad was pretty wild, and I saw heaps and more violence, and I guess more violence than I'd ever seen before with Dad. Yeah, lots of drugs, lots of drinking, lots of heavy characters coming in and out of our lives. But to me, I gravitated towards them. I thought, oh, these guys are what a man is. I want to be like them, and started to you know go more and more down that path and embrace that idea that being you know, a violent man that used violence at all costs was the way to go. And I started to, I guess, form this like idea that because I'd see what would happen when my dad would walk into a room. People would sit up and pay attention. People would um, notice him. He had a presence when he'd go into a room, whether we were going to a party, whether we were going to a clubhouse or wherever we were going. But my dad had a presence, and I thought, it wasn't a presence that I see now with men that have gained respect in normal ways. But so at that time, I seen that, and people were scared of him, and even my mates all thought he was cool and stuff. And I thought, oh, I want to be like that. So I'm going to start to do the things that he's doing to get like that. But unfortunately, there's only room for one lion on the top of the mountain. So my dad and I clashed, really badly during those years, and got to the point where I decided to move out of his house after about 3 or 4 years because that's at one stage there. I thought one of us was going to kill the other one if it kept getting any worse. But that idea of violence and those tastes of violence that stuck with me, and I thought, this is still what a man does, and if anything, it even made me more bent or more determined to become more violent when I left home, moved away from my dad, because I wanted to be badder than him, stronger than him, tougher than him. I wanted him to be in a room and pay attention when I walked in, not the other way around. And the only way I knew how to do that was to in the hope it would get back to him, and in the hope I'd have a chance to cross paths with him again in the future and use that violence on him as well.
Heard you say that you wanted to become a monster because monsters didn't get hurt.
That's exactly what I wanted to do. I kept, going back to those times when I was a little kid, thinking about being hurt and scared and vulnerable. And I thought, if I can, it was around the time that it's probably my late teens, early 20s, I knew that the person from our childhood had been released from jail again for something else. And not only was I forming a plan to hurt my dad, I was forming a really well thought out plan to kill him.
Really?
Yeah, I even secured a gun to do it with. I had a plan. I knew where I was going to grab him from. I knew what car I was going to stuff him into. And I knew exactly what I was going to do. And during that process of forming that plan, I decided to become a monster because monsters don't get hurt. And I thought to myself, if I can go and do this, I can right all those wrongs that from when I was a kid. Was my stepdad, was he angry at me because I couldn't protect mum? Did I let mum down by not being able to protect her? Did I let my little sister down because I couldn't stop what happened to her? I set all this right by doing that. And to even go down that path of becoming what I'll call a monster now, I thought I'm gonna have to get big, and so I started to abuse drugs, anabolic steroids. Started to use amphetamines daily. Started smoking ice, anything that would blunt any thoughts that would sneak in from the great role models. And I had some really good role models growing up. My stepdad, my grandparents, two of the most special people. They were the two most special people in my life. My grandparents have both passed on now, but anytime I'd have a thought of them come into my mind, I would use anything I can to get that out, push it out, because I didn't want to back off from that plan. I didn't want to listen to the good things they had instilled in me, because I wanted to I was hell bent on doing this. I even had a plan worked out.
What does a monster look day to day? Were you in relationships? Were you showing love and then that turning into violence? Were you picking fights at the coffee shop? Like what did it look like?
Yeah, so in the daytime I was working. Working in labouring and construction and things like that. Pretty fine at work. It's pretty construction, things like that, pretty rough. So I wasn't an anomaly on a job site. You know, I was heaps of rough guys on a job site, so I fitted in pretty well. Was definitely in relationships and string of different sort of relationships because uh, I didn't have the knowledge of how to commit to a long-term relationship in a safe and loving and open way. So when things would get too scary in the sense of I'm being expected to commit now, share a little bit about myself, I would jump out of that and jump into another relationship because I I I, I wanted someone around and I wanted that, I guess that's connection with someone, but I didn't know how to have it properly. I didn't really like being alone because then, you know, a lot of the thoughts would come back. I was, you know, I had a lot of voices in my head, different thoughts and things like that. Um, and I started to, you know, when I couldn't get my way with things or I didn't like the way things were going, I started to use violence in my relationships as well. Started, you know, I never used the words, you know, low level, high level violence as violence, but started off as verbal, you know, threats and things like that, and you know, escalated to physical violence. And at the time, I didn't see anything wrong with it, and even at the time, you know, looked to outside of like the physical men that I was seeing day to day and think I want to be like that. I was, you know, I had this idea of, you know, wanting to be a man was like my role model in like make believe world, I guess, was Jake the Muss off Once Were Warriors because he was this big guy and, you know, he ruled his house. And, you know, I would look at things like that and I think, oh, that's the sort of partner I'm going to be. That's, you know, so I thought that was an ideal relationship as well. And I started to, you know, mirror or copycat those exact behaviors that people like that were demonstrating as well, even though he's only a fictional character. But I thought that was a relationship, and I thought, you know, there was something to be controlling your partner was something to be proud of. I thought that was something to be proud of. You know what I mean?
I'm imagining that these women would have been doing things like crying, cowering, running away from you when stuff like this was happening. And what I'm trying to understand is, as a little boy, you hated seeing that happening to your mum. You physically tried to stop that happening. So how could you do that to other women and not feel that same feeling that you had with your mum?
Yeah, I wouldn't even, you know, lie or try and make an excuse to you, Gemma, and say, oh, you know, it was blunted because I was smoking ice. It was blunted because I was using cocaine or whatever. Wouldn't even bother trying to rationalize it by saying that. I don't know. I don't know how I could do it. You know, I don't know. But what I do know was that when those things would happen, like partners would cry or things like that, I never would be the one to say, you know, comfort them or hug them or, you know, say, you okay? Talk about it more like, you know, can stop crying or, you know, shut up. Um, what are you crying for? You know what I mean? I'd even start to dip my toe in that pool of, oh, you think this is bad, you know? You should have grew up how I grew up. This is, you know, this is not even bad. What's happening to you? Um, or even make myself the focus of it. That's how fucking fucked up I was. Uh, they would be crying because of something I'd done and say, oh, you should have seen what happened to me when I was little and nobody cared about me. You know, like, poor me, you know what I mean? I was doing some awful things. And I don't know. I don't know why.
I think that
Yeah.
that's really hard to hear that you don't know, because I think there's so much violence now. Like we hear about women dying every week at the hands of violent men. And I think that's why I'm like, why? Tell me why.
Yeah.
Why are these men so violent when they can see that these people that they supposedly love are bashed, bruised, damaged, crying, and it's devastating to hear that. I mean, you're such a different man now, and looking back, that you can't pinpoint why.
I think like I can pinpoint heaps of reasons why. The exposure to what I saw growing up, the normalization of violence in our house, the status that being a violent person or violent man gave me amongst my peer group, um, you know, my inability to feel things. I was blunted to feeling anything. So I have heaps of reasons why, but I feel like every time I say that, even when I say that to you now, I feel like it takes away from I feel like I'm taken away from the experience of my partners at the time. I feel like I'm robbing them of what they felt, and they're by trying to say, oh, it's because I was bashed as a kid. It's because I only saw violence. It's because so yeah, I know why I was doing it, but I just feel like every time I say it, just feels piss weak in comparison to what my partners would have been going through. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I completely get it. And I can see why from your childhood, but I think it's just like, it's this thing that in society we're trying to unpick. Why are men violent? Why are they doing this?
Yeah.
And we always have said that it started from childhood and it's something that you learn over time. But I guess it's now at a point where we're like, well, how do we unpick it?
Yeah.
There was an incident outside a pub, because it wasn't only women. We've talked about your dad and your stepdad, but you were kind of hurting men as well. Yeah. Tell me about the incident outside the pub, because that kind of changed the game a bit.
That changed the game considerably, because at that stage of my life, I was pretty resigned to. I wanted to join a fight club because that gave me a lot of connection and identity and belonging, and I thought that's what my next part of my life's going to be like. Whether that involves going to jail or not, whether my offending gets worse or not, it's all part and parcel of what's to come down the path. So I was, on that track, and I was fairly happy in a drug-addled, messed up kind of way. That assault, though, that happened that night outside a pub in Wagga, the severity of that, not only in what happened during that assault, but in terms of what I was charged with, changed the game for me, because all of a sudden these encounters with the criminal justice system that I've been having, nights here and there in custody, refused bail, things like that. I seemed to be a period of time where I was always in contact with the system, whether it was for a bond or a probation order, or had to go and do a course and things like that. And this is how messed up I was. I remember having to do a 10-week anger management course for a violent offence committed while I was drunk. And that doesn't excuse it, but it's part of the story. And then on week 10 of that course, going out and getting drunk again to graduate, celebrate graduating the course, and then assaulting someone again, like I was an idiot, like a clown, But that assault that night, all of a sudden, these little bits and pieces of like good behaviour bonds and probation orders and things like that, all of a sudden escalated to potentially 10 years in custody.
Wow.
So it was at that time that I started to, people would say to me, when I was on bail, like, "You worried about going?" No, but I was worried about going to jail, because I'd started to distance myself a little bit away from some of the lifestyle and people that I was hanging around. And it was during that time I started to spend more and more time in the company of my grandparents as well, and got off the drugs and started to open up to what life might be like without violence. I started to forget about trying to kill that other guy, and in the sense of there had to be more to life. And it was around about that same time that I met someone and they became pregnant, and that for me that was that's my oldest son's mum, and that for me that was a catalyst to change, because I thought I had lots of relationships and things like that hadn't been enough to make me change. Not that it was their responsibility, my partners, but when I knew that I was going to be a dad, I thought to myself, there's someone coming along, or someone will be coming along, that's going to need me more than I need me. So I had to get better. And then when we went to the ultrasound, found out we're having a little boy, I thought this is a real chance to break that cycle. And still had a pretty heavy jail sentence hanging over my head. I was on bail when I met my oldest son's mum, and she had put up with a lot of things, me having to report and do all these things she probably wasn't expecting when you start a relationship. I started to do things a little bit better and started to coach kids with boxing and things like that. And by the time this matter ended up going through court, had been through court, maybe 2 years that had sort of went through the process. Going to court, I, really removed myself from that other lifestyle, and started to try and change things, and started trying to be better and do better. And fortunately, the magistrate or the judge saw that when I came up to be sentenced.
Because he ended up giving you a suspended sentence, so no jail time.
So no jail time, which was, for me, it was really as a chance at was a second chance at life. And at that stage, I think I was maybe 23 or 4, which is young. It's still young, but for me, and when I talk to other men that have lived similar lives, 23 years or 24 years of violence is, I feel like it's like 124 years of life. It's like aging in dog years.
You are one of the minority that deserved a second chance, but I can't move past this part of the conversation without asking you, because I feel like there are so many stories that I write every week, that my team writes, about men who get second chances from magistrates with lengthy violent pasts who end up killing someone the next time they're out, largely women. But do you think that these men or more men are needing these second chances? Do we need to be tougher? What's your take?
How much time do we have? In all seriousness, I'm thankful for a second chance. And if you looked at my story on paper, no way. I'd already had a 13th, 14th chance. You know what I mean? I should not have had that chance. I'm thankful now every day that I had, 20 years now. But when we see what you're talking about with men killing women while they're on bail or while they're on parole, or, continuing to get bail despite these lengthy criminal histories related to domestic and family violence, we have to be tougher. I guess in talking to men that are used violence and men that perhaps don't want to be violent anymore, but without making this sound like a cop-out, they don't want to be violent, haven't been shown anything different, or they don't know how to do things differently. Sometimes I think when we tell people, just stop using violence, just stop, just don't be violent, it's about as useful as telling a woman in that situation, I'll just leave.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't.
It's not that easy.
It's not that easy. And so what I've gained from talking to men, if we're talking about the court system and the judicial system and things like that, is that men that are trying to change their behaviour will often not have access to programs or things that are therapeutic in nature, definitely, but behavioural change that's delivered by men that have used violence and changed, if you know what I mean. I think if we're going to change the behaviour of men that are using violence, they probably need to hear from other men that have used violence and have changed. Been delivering a program recently around domestic and family violence to young men in custody. And it's over 2 days and talk about violence and, creating an identity for young men without violence attached to it, and their experiences, witnesses of DV as kids, and they've gone on to perpetrate the same violence and things like that, and, interspersing these pieces of breathwork throughout these 2 days. And I guess what I'm getting at is when I set that program up, I've got a remarkable female co-facilitator, and I think that dynamic is what's needed too in terms of what we do in custody, but also with men in the community, because I have to hear a female perspective, especially from a victim survivor standpoint, but also coming from a man who's lived that life and walked that path and knows what it's like to change, because sometimes the people that are delivering these programs haven't. haven't been in that mindset before and don't know what it takes to change. And I feel like that probably takes a lot away from the experience of the person in the program too. But in a long-winded way, to answer your question, yeah, I do think we absolutely need to be tougher, especially on bail conditions, or presumption against bail for people that have a history of domestic and family violence offending, because the fact of the matter is we're losing women, and we're losing them at the hands of men that have been violent. They've got a history of violence. It's not like, oh, this is the first time you're before the court will give you bail, rule in favour of bail. This is your 50th time before the court. We're giving you bail again, and it can't just be an overcrowding of prison. We've got no beds, or there's no funding for I don't know, for programs or things like that. So we'll have to put you here and need to do something about it, because I think we reached a peak 18 months ago. We were losing one woman every 4 days, and the father of 4, 2 boys, 2 girls, don't want my girls to grow up. I don't want my girls to grow up in a world where they could, the statistics of that.
You mentioned, I don't know the statistics off the top of my head, but it is like 5, 7, 10 times that women try and leave violent partners before they actually leave. Do you think it's similar with men? It's 5, 10, 15 times of like trying to rein in that violence. Like, how is that process of turning your life around? How does that go? Because you've talked to thousands of men, not just your own experience, but is it possible? Can we turn violent men into good citizens?
Yeah, I like the way you put that. I think we absolutely can. I think some things have to change though, and one of those things that has to change is, if you're a man that's using violence, quite often you have to come into contact with the criminal justice system to then be eligible for referral into a program.
Right.
Why do you have to be
At that point.
to get help? It's like, why can't you get help earlier? Why can't clinical interventions for violent men be eligible for Medicare? Why why can't uh, family therapy or marriage or relationship counselling? Why can't that be bulk bill? Like I know I'm talking about money, but there's seems to be some barriers in the way of men accessing help earlier on in their trajectory of violent behaviour or relationship difficulties that, I don't know. I feel like that could be removed without a lot of without a lot of obstacle. But also, you know, we're seeing men engage in programs under the direction of the court, quite often as a diversion to custody or when they're on parole. So there's this onus of, well, I'll do that now because I don't want to go to jail, or I'll do that now because I don't want to go to, I don't want to breach my parole.
Not because I'm ready to change.
Not because I'm ready to change. And I guess one of the things that I'm doing in terms of delivering those programs in custody is think, let's do that here. You're quite literally a captive audience. So let's do that now.
Yeah.
Let's do that while you're in custody, not when you get out and you're just going to do it because it's breaching your, I don't want to breach my parole, so I better can't do this stupid course, there has to be more opportunity for men that are wanting to change to engage in programs rather than having to get to a point where they're directed by the court and then quite often are only doing it.
Therapy is such a big part of all of this. So I want to rewind a bit and talk about your journey with therapy, because it didn't start great. You finally reached out. You're ready to change. You sit down with a therapist and he's a, excuse my language, dickhead to you.
Yeah. So my journey with therapy actually started a little. So I talk about having 3 strikes. So 3 strikes with therapy. So at the height of my violence, and it's a height, probably the low of my violence, addiction and dysfunction, I actually tried to take my own life. Finished up in a psychiatric ward in a hospital and asked for help then at an early age. I think I was 22.
Really?
Things could have been, things would have been different. They could have been. But I remember the psychiatrist telling me, and at that stage, I didn't have any skills in life. I knew how to pour concrete and be violent. I didn't know how to make dinners, things like that. I didn't even know how to go doctor if I had a sore ear or anything. But at that stage, I thought, this is an opportunity now for help. So I was getting a bit fatigued. So it's life, you know. When I'd be home alone and I'd hurt partners or I'd hurt people, and I was home alone and cry a lot because I was this scared little kid, and I thought, getting tired of this. I want some help. And so I asked the psychiatrist if I could stay in hospital when he came to discharge me. And I remember him saying, first time I'd ever been vulnerable, I remember him saying, no, you can't stay here because you don't belong. People like you don't belong in hospital, they belong in jail. And talked to me about drug-induced psychosis, things like that. And I didn't understand it. But all I understood was the first few words of you belong in jail.
You don't belong
You
here.
don't belong here. You don't deserve help, lock you up like an animal, and it was probably part of it was a fair statement, but that was my first strike, and it took me another 7-ish years to reach out for help. And then I went and saw a counsellor, and I remember crying in that session because he asked me why I was there, and I thought about my son, and didn't want him to go through the things I'd gone through. I hadn't used violence for a long time, like 5 years at that stage, and I still had all these ideas that I had to get, I knew the work wasn't done, and I remember him laughing at me, crying, or giggling, And I know now as a counsellor, sometimes you have to reach to build a rapport, and I think look back now is that his misguided way of trying to build a rapport, but him saying, I'd never seen anyone with tattoos cry before. There's 2 strikes. I'm out of here.
And someone who hasn't been violent, you wanted to be violent.
Yeah, I did in that moment. And I talk about this when I share my story, Jim. In that moment, I felt so weak and vulnerable, and in that moment, I actually went to grab that guy because I wanted to revert back to that behaviour, because the only one knew how to reverse that at that time, and we're going back 15 years now, but now the only way I knew how to change that was to be the one that was in the position of power, and almost slipped back into that behaviour then. So but my third, lucky, I spoke to another guy. I'd been training a few boxers back then, and spoke to another guy. He'd actually just come out of jail, and he had to see, talk about not wanting to do things under duress, but he had to see a psychologist as part of his parole. I was training for a fight, and he said to me, mate, go and see this guy is unreal. And what he said probably galvanised it for me, because he understands blokes like us, you and I. So I went along and saw this other fella, psychologist, and he was incredible. Unfortunately, he very rudely got a promotion and stopped practicing a couple of years later. So I ended up having to find someone else. Conversely, who I see now, who's a female psychologist. And those first couple of strikes were all with men, because I thought, never talk to a woman doctor or clinician, or only want to speak to men, Probably embarrassed to talk about the things I'd done too, because I thought, judge me, and
a lot of them were 2 women.
Yeah, I've done a lot of shitty things to women. How's a female clinician or psychologist going to relate to me? And the lady I see now is amazing, But yeah, so therapy was a pretty bumpy road for me at the beginning, and it almost pulled out a couple of times.
Do you think if you, as that young little boy, age 5, it's so young to think about therapy, but if you had some kind of therapy at that age, do you think that we could have saved you from this life of violence?
Yeah, I think so, Gemma. I see now, working with, adolescent mental health, part of my job, I see some really specialised clinicians that provide, trauma-informed care for kids that had the same lives as me, some lot them worse than what I went through. And I see that work that's being done with them, and it's remarkable. And I think if I had had that opportunity, and stayed with my mum and stepdad, definitely later on in life, I end up being diagnosed with attachment disorder and complex PTSD and ADHD, and talk about that to some people, and they ask me a very similar question to what you've asked, but more in terms of medication for ADHD. And oh, if you had had that earlier, do you think life would have been different maybe as a teenager? Because I was pretty terrible at school. I was bad academically and I was really naughty. But I think to myself, no, because living with my dad, I wouldn't have understood it. You know, he wouldn't have taken me for the appointments or anything like that. So I think that diagnosis and that medication came along at the right time. But if I had had someone, a psychologist or psychiatrist or a counsellor or someone that really cared when I was 5, yeah, I think things would have been a lot different. If I stayed with my mum and stepdad and continued to have influence from my grandparents, things would have been different. And you know, when I first started sharing my story, it was from a colleague or a friend now who's a social worker and lecturer. She said to me, because I kept saying, no, no, talk about it. Her hook to me a few years ago, 5, 6 years ago, was, no, you need to come in and I want you to speak to. I've got a bunch of third year social work students at uni, one of the unis here in Sydney, shall remain nameless. And she said, I need you to come in and talk to them because they need to know what you needed from a social worker when you were growing up, but you didn't get it, how your life might have been different if you had someone who cared. So I think if I had had opportunity for that 38 years ago, things would have been different.
I keep mentioning you help thousands of men, you talk to thousands of men and women. Can you explain to the listeners what that means? Because over the last 20 years, you've been working in kind of the mental health space, but also boxing. Paint a picture of what you've been doing.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you. So primarily work with, so I've got 2 jobs. Work for, say it, but
You are.
okay. So I work for New South Wales Health full time. Work with young people in custody as a clinician. That involves running programs throughout youth justice centres. Used to be what people used to call juvies across the state. And the focus of 3 programs in my portfolio. One's a domestic and family violence breathwork program for young men and women in custody. The other one's a remote psychiatry clinic outreach to rural New South Wales. And the other one is a program around understanding your own mental health and how important that is to your identity. So, you know, really quite busy with that. But on the side of that, I've had a private practice for the last company business practice for the last 5 years, rolling with the punches, where I initially started that to make mental health services more accessible. So I've been working with state government for about 20 years now, but doing my own stuff for about 5 years. And the reason I wanted to do that was I wanted to make mental health services more accessible for people that were falling through the gaps. And what I was getting was this feedback of, we want to talk to someone about our mental health. We want to talk to someone who looks like us. So I had a few people say, you're a counsellor, but you don't look like a counsellor, so it makes us feel comfortable. So I started to do that a little bit more and more and more, and that grew a fair bit. Started to probably work with men that weren't going to access therapy anywhere ever. And that had its barriers too, in the sense of, like, a lot of that stuff's free because these are not guys that are going to go and get a mental health care plan or things like that.
Probably haven't been to a GP.
Haven't been to a GP. And so that was good though, because that was part of my own healing, was to be able to not attach I'll do this because I'm going to get, $100 for it. I'll do this because I get paid for it. It was more like, I'll do this because it's important. And, I'm really lucky to have an amazing wife, Kate, that she could see the benefit in that stuff as well. Really understanding kids that know. Sometimes I say, what do you do for work, Dad? And try and help people is the easiest way to explain it, especially to the little ones. But with the private stuff, the first few years was just men, just working around men's mental health and things like that. And I started to branch out a little bit more in the sense of, all right, so we're working with these men, but then how do we rebuild trust with their partners and kids, especially with men that had been violent? And around that time, this is around the time, really overwhelming statistics around, partner violence and women being murdered at the hands of their partners a few years ago. Sort of branched off and started up a free women's boxing program for domestic violence awareness and connection and empowerment for women, and got some tough feedback on that from some people, because some of the emails and messages I get were around, that's great, mate, but why should women have to learn to box?
Which is always the,
Yeah, you guys
yeah.
should just stop beating us up and killing us, and
Yep.
that's true.
It's true.
And my feedback to that was, completely empathise with where you're coming from, but as someone who's had my past as a father of two girls, it's the only way I know how to really help is to share something that helped me in boxing, and create this community of women that were able to be connected through boxing. And unfortunately, about 2 years ago, so I sort of step right back from that and hand that over to a female coach. Had some funding for her, Celeste. She's a legend. To they pay her to run that, and so to answer your question, from mental health into sort of, I guess, more family work. Always sharing my story along the way when the opportunity would arise. I've shared it a lot with Department of Education teachers to help them understand when you're presented with a kid like me that's leaving class, telling you to fuck off, climbing up on the roof, things like that. Maybe this is why I share my story. I share what I went through. But I've probably got to the point where I'm at now, where a lot of the work now is in delivering sort of week-long interventions now with groups of men in different parts of Australia. And some of the feedback I get is, next time you come, could you, and I said, back off a little bit in the programs, or, we want you to come back and run it again. But the men said it was really confronting. And I say, if you want someone to tiptoe around these issues and get some, with respect, there's plenty of other blokes out there doing this work. Find someone else, because if I'm making the effort to go to different parts of Australia and you're making the effort to bring me there, then I'm gonna get like we've got boring in.
You're not going to sugarcoat your
the change
story, or no,
the change won't happen if we continue to, tiptoe around these issues and not call out the behaviour of the men that are using the violence. And if someone had called my stuff out earlier on, maybe it might have been enough for me to stop either. So can't sit around in groups of, men and, normalise this behaviour, or, only work on the physical violence, but it's okay if you're verbally, because that's not really, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, so my program's pretty intensive, but I think that's the only way to make a change.
Are you seeing success stories?
Yeah. Yeah, seeing success stories in the sense that going to do a job shortly, where it's a group of men that came through my program that are now wanting to facilitate the programs themselves. So
That's
they're now
awesome.
like, so we were participants. We want you to now, like, can you come back and train us to deliver these interventions as well, because we believe in it, and we've changed the things that we were doing as well. So that's probably one of the most resounding success stories when you see that.
Yeah.
And also when we're seeing young people coming through custody and, they stop coming back. Seeing people that I've worked with over the last 20 years now in healthy, functional relationships. They've got their own kids, I may have met them in custody. They may have been locked up. They'll come back now and they'll say things like, when you came in and talked to us about healthy relationships 5 years ago, or 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 years ago, at the time I wasn't open to that. At the time I was like, whatever. But now 10 years later, I've got a partner, we've got kids of our own. I often go back to those things, and I stopped going back to custody, and I stopped wanting people to associate my name with being the best car thief or the best criminal, or I wanted them to associate my name with being the best carpenter or the best youth worker or the best doctor, or helped me form an identity away from violence.
We talk about men avoiding therapy. I can imagine that when you first talk to them about breathwork, they're a bit hesitant. Can you give us an example of what that actually looks like? I'm trying to visualize what breathwork with men who are violent even looks like.
Yeah, I'll give you a funny visual. I remember running a program for a group of men, and for their own anonymity, not that they would mind. I won't identify them, but they're part of a really successful program that's been running in Sydney for a number of years. It's men that are coming to the end of their custodial sentences and they're allowed out of prison each day to participate in programs. It can be job readiness, fitness stuff, cultural things, but a big component of it is addressing a violent behaviour. And so to see a group of men engaging in breathwork practices, laying on the floor in a room, and the breathwork that I teach, wear eye mask and headphones because it completely individualizes it. So you're not like looking at the person next to you thinking, he's not doing it properly, But seeing all those guys really immersed in that, but also seeing all their ankle monitors is a funny one. That's a funny one. But they buy into it, and going out to places where thought that it would never be, people would never get into it. We're really lucky to be able to share that with men and women and young people as well, because it's taking therapy out of a clinical environment.
Brush me off if this is not possible, but I'm wearing headphones.
Yeah.
I can close my eyes.
Yeah.
Can you put me through an exercise?
I'll also take the young guys and young men and women in custody through breathing practices, and other people through breathing practices they can do in the moment, that they don't need subscription to an app or headphones or me sitting there. They can do it if they're in a situation where they're feeling like things are starting to heighten, feel like they're becoming unsafe, and it could be in traffic, could be anywhere. So we can go through something.
Yeah, let's do one.
So it's pretty easy, this one. It's easy because it's a good go-to. I don't know if you're familiar with box breathing.
Nope.
Okay, so I'll get you to close your eyes. You're going to go inhale for 4 seconds. I'll count you through it. So if you close your eyes. Yeah, so I want you to take a big inhale for 4, 2, hold for 4, 2, 4, for 4, hold on empty for 4, 2, 3, in round 2, 4, hold for 4, 4, out for 4, 2, in on empty, 2, 1, halfway in, 2, 3, 4, hold for 4, 2, 4, out for 4, 4, hold on empty, 2, 4, last one, in 4, 2, 4, hold, 4, out for 4, 4, hold on empty, 4, a normal breathing pattern. Maybe you feel a little bit calmer.
I'm like, whoa.
Yeah, and that's easy. You can do that.
Because I wouldn't consider myself a violent person, but I have 2 kids under 3. My husband's currently away for work. I'm solo parenting. I've got a lot of stress, a lot of tension. And for me, it made me focus on the breathing, and I could feel my brain just kind of chilling out a bit. So I can imagine if I was, I had violent tendencies, it's that moment, like just stop for a minute and breathe. And I can see how that really works.
Yeah, it's easy. That's a go-to. Anybody can do that. You don't need me or headphones.
There's a lot of women who would be listening to this, hopefully learning a lot from you. But what would you want them to take away from our chat? If
they can take anything away from this conversation with the experiences they may have had throughout their lives, is that there are some safe men out there. Some men can change their behaviour. I would never suggest to a woman that's been through violence, they should just open up off the back of this podcast and go, oh well, he did it, I can trust everyone, or he'll change, or I'll give my partner another go that's been awful to me for a whole relationship. But there are safe men out there, and actually there's a small number of men that are doing the same work that are really trying to change. There's a few of us that are really trying to change things for women, but also for men and also for families.